that is the context. That is what we are given, and we will have to address even the natural resource base, but at the same time address the challenge of economic growth and prosperity for all. And inequality, as everyone knows, is growing, and how to address that is the challenge. A lot of people these days and for last 20 years are increasingly talking about the complexity and dynamics of these issues, and particularly when it comes to materializing these issues for the grassroots level work or the actions and policy, both at the macro as well as the micro level. And people are trying to bring in complexity perspective, systems thinking, and trying to connect various nodes and how it can be done. So the concept that is emerging, as different people are calling it differently, but some of them call it sustainable community development. And by sustainable community development, there's not much difference in the debate that we summarized a while ago. But what they essentially mean is current system, and this is again philosophy and paradigm in a way. They're saying that the whole system of development today is egoistic. It puts human at the top, and then everything else is supposed to be fall in place for serving the ever increasing and expanding needs of the human being, right? And the major shift that we need now across all levels, even at individual level, at the core of ourselves, as a society, as regional communities, as well as at the subnational and national level when it comes to policy design. One major shift is required, and that shift is that we need to appreciate human beings are only a part of a community of natural biodiversity, which is called as ecosystem, right? So now focus is shifting towards ecosystem development. So people call it landscape management, people call it ecosystem development, people call it community development, but essentially the thought is that we are one of all, right? And none of us is important as much as the all is, or as much as the whole is. So people have increasingly realizing, at least the thinkers, philosophers, academics, they are increasingly realizing it, and some of them are trying to do it in the policy sphere also, but it's not still very prominent there, or even in action. So how to enable this thinking in policy design and in practice is the question, and that's the major challenge. But people are increasingly realizing it. I mean, at least the thinkers, that we need to consider this as a this is a very egoistic system, and we have to appreciate that we are only a part of the larger whole, and therefore we have to live in tandem with it. Otherwise, we won't be able to survive for a much longer. And then there has been a discussion on catastrophe and what will happen, whether this planet will collapse. The planet is not going to collapse definitely, but planet is likely to change its state. And when it will get into a new state, it may not be as supportive to the life as it is today, right? So it will take completely different shape, and a different dynamics will unfold, and different form of life may also unfold. So planet is going to stay there. It's not about the planet, right? It's about us. It's about whether we value the beauty of the planet as it is today or not, right? Or we want to sacrifice it and compromise it for our own ego. That's the question, and people wanted to address this question, and that's where the idea of sustainable community development is coming in now. It's about human development. Yes, of course, we cannot ignore need for economic prosperity, having enough to feed everyone, having good access and quality education, health services, even entertainment. Some of the infrastructures that we use today have been critical for human survival and human prosperity further. But at the same time, what about the biodiversity of this planet? What about the environmental, the ecosystems? So it's combining both the agendas in its true sense, right? So Brundtland Commission had tried to combine these two agendas, and what they have done is they have created one universal framework where everyone can come in, and that's the positive side of Brundtland's work. That today both the corporations, government, authoritarian, non-authoritarian, whatever, kind of government it is, all sorts of government, all sorts of corporations, even the civil society organizations, think tanks, they all can come together and deliberate and contribute something to, ever expanding agenda of SDGs. That's the other side, flip side of the critic. But yes, I mean, we have created a platform where everyone can come and, contribute something. But the politics or the political analysis of what is going on suggests that, it's been a whitewash in one way. So that is debatable. But the sustainable community development approach is actually, making it happen on a regional scale. So here the approach is not, making it on a really planetary level or a broader national or subnational level, but to making it happen at the ecosystem level. So considering an ecosystem as a unit, or a landscape, as you call it, as a unit, and then, developing it in a manner that help both the human settlement as well as the biodiversity to flourish, right? And then exploring connections and developing those connections is essentially what is the approach. The approach also believes that, the more sophisticated and technical term or jargon to call it is, systems development or sustainable systems development, you call it whatever you call it. The essence is systems on their own, whether they are natural systems or, man-made systems, but living systems, right? And we will have to, have a separate session to talk about what does it mean by a living system. But let me give you a very brief idea of it. So the essential characteristic of a living system is that, the systems are self-organizing. They organize on their own. These systems are self-regenerative because they are inherently intelligent. They are inherently intuitive. So let the, system explore its own potential to be intelligent, to be intuitive, so that it can recreate itself or reorganize itself, in the wake of shocks or in the wake of stresses, and be more resilient. So understanding that whole in an ecosystem, considering its biophysical environment, its ecology, its biodiversity, human settlement, and the way human and nature interacts with each other. So the focus now is shifting more on understanding, and it has already shifted, and a lot of people have done a lot of work on understanding interactions between the human and nature. So that's the perspective in, broadly. And I would like to share, more resources on this with you if you are interested in learning it more deeply. But my today's focus is more on, why is it challenging to enable this perspective? And that's, I would like to come to the second question, that why is it so challenging to enable this, to make it happen at the grassroots level, to make the change happen at that level, the last mile level. There are, as far as I see from a practitioner's point of view, there are 5 reasons why, what is making it challenging. The very first reason, which we talked about is the status quo or the dominant discourse, which is liked by the decision makers. And if we approach it from the aspiration point of view, even the aspirations of communities or we as individuals have changed a lot. So are we really ready to live within the ecological limits is the question everyone should answer. And yes, of course, increasing number of people are trying to live a sustainable lifestyle, particularly in urban areas, but in rural and tribal areas where people are already aligned with, the aspirations for the way urban development has happened in India, or the way European and American development has happened over the last 2 centuries. So what to do with those aspirations? So by status quo, I don't only mean the policies or the way programs are implemented or what we all as individuals like, right? But particularly, those who consider themselves more responsible for letting this planet survive, but also people who are at the receiving end. And what about their aspirations? What about their ambitions from the life? So how to address that challenge? The shifting aspirations challenge is one of the major issues. So by status quo, I mean all the 3: the policies, programs, and aspirations of all of us, especially those of the marginal communities. How to address that is the challenge. Second is, the interdisciplinarity or the systems thinking, which I talked about. Embracing this holistic approach will require systems thinking, which we are not trained at. Our habitual thinking patterns or our thinking habits are very well nurtured by our schooling. And at our schools, we were never taught to, look at the whole or appreciate the whole. Rather, we were so passionate about scientific temperament and scientific approach that we are all taught to reduce things into smaller fragments and look at them very closely, and make sense, and then develop more technologies and products and services. And it has been a habit. So we will have to unlearn a lot and embrace more holistic approach in our thinking. To the extent, when I offer systems thinking workshops, I ask the very first question to my participants is that, look, this is the cup of coffee, and if I'm going to take a sip of this, can you visualize this as a system? Do you consider this as a system? A lot of people perceive order as a system, social order, political order, ecological order as a system, right? If we have to, make a shift in our perspective, make a shift in our paradigm, we need to develop a thinking skill which enables us consider whether having a sip of coffee is a system or not, right? And if it is a system, what makes it a system? And then how it works. So if we develop that skill, if we develop that lens, then only we will be able to look at anything and everything around us from systems point of view. Otherwise, it's not possible. So we will have to, nurture our thinking muscles in a different manner. We'll have to retone our thinking muscles. We will have to, get aside from the scientific temperament or love for scientific temperament. Scientific temperament has its own value. I am not, discouraging it. But it also has its own limitations and consequences. So we need to make best use of science, but at the same time, we also need to expand our vision and expand our thinking. And somehow we are not taught how to do it. We are not trained. And unless we are trained, we cannot practice it. We cannot do it. That was the reason why, we started working on introducing systems approach right in the school curriculum. Now, systems approach has been adopted by many disciplines. I assume many of you are sociologists, political scientists, even from, other disciplines. So almost every discipline's literature today has a section on systems approach or systems thinking, and they have adopted systems thinking. And that's where, the community of intellects have made the major mistake. And the mistake is that the very beauty or the essence of systems approach was to integrate everything and start looking at everything from a new lens. What we have done in the process of adopting systems thinking is that we have, translated and broken down the whole approach and adapted it to our old ways of thinking, right? Whether it was sociological thinking or political thinking or engineering thinking or management perspective, whatever perspective we were living with, we have adopted systems thinking to it rather than adopting ourselves to a new approach. And that's why the way systems thinking is practiced today in various academic disciplines cannot be a real systems thinking, right? And that's why I start with this question. Can you imagine having a sip of coffee as a system and, its consequences and then how to deal with it? If you can do that, then you can, whether you are a sociologist or economist or a political scientist or an engineer or a manager or, whatever, you would be able to look at a problem from a very different lens and perspective. Otherwise, we will continue with, the old wine, but only in a new bottle, which is not going to help us. So the second challenge is to embrace a completely new way of thinking and looking at things, which is emerging or has emerged as systems approach or systems thinking, complexity approach. And, it's been only 100 years old, not more than that. And even for the first 50 years, it was still developing. Right, people were experimenting with concepts, theories, ideas. That started with biology, and now a lot of disciplines have developed some understanding of those concepts. In the application, we have created the mess. But in terms of translating concepts, yes, a lot of good disciplinary work has been done. So that's the second challenge, to embrace a new kind of thinking. The third challenge is lack of leadership to implement this kind of thinking, and lack of leadership at the grassroots level. So if you want to embrace a more holistic community approach, and by community I don't mean human settlement, by community I mean the community of all living creatures. So if you want to embrace that approach, we need, people like Rahi Bai and others. You might have seen the list of Padma Shris this year and the last year, and a lot of people who are working with ecosystem have been appreciated for their work. So we need leaders like them. We don't want people, who are trained only at institutes like IIMs and IITs and, are supposed to be business leaders or leaders in their own disciplines. But we need more than them. They have their own utility. I'm not, denying that. But more than them, we need people at the grassroots who can lead this kind of thinking and action. And we don't have that sort of leadership at the grassroots at the moment. The grassroots leadership either aligned with the political leadership, or it is aligned with a more spiritual kind of leadership. So you will see the village level champions, they're either part of some of the political parties, or they align themselves with some political vertical, or they are part of some spiritual groups and traditions. We don't have, and it's not that we don't need political and spiritual leadership in the society. We do need it even at the grassroots, but at the same time we need people who can embrace the more holistic and larger canvas. And that leadership is not there. We need to develop that leadership. Fourth is, the voluntary sector or the civil society sector is, I don't know what to call it, but the civil society sector, position itself on, either this extreme or that extreme. One extreme is confrontation, agitation, demanding, what they want on one side. And on the other side, we have people who are engaged only with the service delivery and, providing goods and, implementing programs in a very projected manner. And, that's the challenge. I don't think we have enough soul in our civil society today, in terms of embracing new thinking, in terms of experimenting with approaches, in terms of doing something which is really different than what we have been doing over last 40, 50, 60 years in India. And of course there are examples, there are exceptions, there are people who are trying to develop this community approach in their own work, in their own ways, particularly those who are working with natural resource management issues. So for example, people who are involved in forest rights act, or people who are working on biodiversity register creation. So these people are trying to develop community of people who believe in different